Hello and welcome to episode 24 of Stitched in Sweden. I'm Maria, your host, and you can find me on Ravelry and Instagram as mmonska. The show notes for this episode and previous episodes can be found at stitchedinsweden.blogspot.com. This week I'm going to tell you a little bit about this week in Stockholm, what I've been working on, some finished objects, and a technique tip, as well as a little discussion about advancing your knitting skills and when to move beyond beginner patterns. So, starting out, this week in Stockholm, we have had a lot of rain, but we have also had some very sunny days like today. I have spent most of the week working on pattern writing and knitting a lot on some new patterns, which I will share with you soon. Oh yeah, and I would like to say thank you so much for those of you who responded to my questions and thinking out loud last week when I was asking about whether or not I should be sharing patterns before I've released them. And some of you left some very thoughtful comments over on the Ravelry group. So, I really appreciate that. But yes, this week has been a lot of pattern writing and knitting, as well as on Thursday, I got to go to the Stockholm Night Knitters again. We meet in the city on every other Thursday night, and I haven't been there in quite a few weeks, maybe since June, because I was traveling and it seemed that my schedule was always just, I was here on the Thursdays that were the non-knitting weeks, so I was happy to be able to go again this week and catch up with some people there. There's less people who come during the summer, I think, because a lot of people are traveling and their schedules just don't match up as well, or it's not as easy just to stop by after work or something, but it was very nice to see some people who I have met before, and then also some new knitters who have joined the group. I was talking with one knitter there who I haven't met before, and we were discussing how Stockholm needs a really awesome yarn store and what that would mean. So it was a lot of dreaming and mostly just dreaming. I would like to say planning, but no. Dreaming for what the perfect yarn store would look like in Stockholm. But that was really fun. On Saturday, Thomas and I set out to the summer house in the archipelago, and we spent Saturday evening there and then all of Sunday. And we left on Sunday night and just got back. Today's Monday, but I don't put this out till Tuesdays. Anyway, we had a really lovely time there. Thomas's parents have been there almost the whole summer, and it has been rainy, just like it has been here in the city. They said really the only nice weeks that they've had were the weekend that my parents were there visiting, and then we got super lucky this past weekend and had 2 beautiful sunny days. Unfortunately, their vacation is now pretty much over, so most of their summer was rainy, but it was really nice to have 2 sunny days this weekend. We did some blueberry picking. Their whole property, like I said before, is filled with blueberry bushes, shrubs kind of. So I spent probably a good hour or so on Sunday morning picking blueberries and got about probably a quarter of a gallon of blueberries. So you know those big, I think they're gallon size Ziploc bags? I have probably maybe a third of one of those filled with little blueberries. So there were so many more of them this time than when we went with my parents, and there was already a lot when I was there with my parents, so that was nice to see, and it made it easy to pick them. So I'm thinking of ways to preserve those. I'll probably go through and wash them a bit today, and perhaps pack some in some bags to freeze them so that we can have them with oatmeal and, I don't know, toppings to oatmeal and other things during the winter. We also picked some strawberries. They have planted some strawberries there in a little patch, and it has just grown really well, so that was a treat for sure. Every couple of days they can pick a whole new bowl of strawberries, and they were delicious. We did get to go out on the boat a little bit. We took out the small aluminum boat, and Thomas and I went out in the morning, just went around the island that they live on, or where their house is. We just went around that island, maybe 20 minutes or something ride, and then for lunch we decided that we would go with everyone who was still there, which was me, Thomas, one of his brothers, and his dad, and we would head out to find another island that might be a little calmer from the wind. So with 4 of us in that little boat, it was quite full and quite, I don't know how do you say it, but the boat was sinking. Yeah, but it was we weren't out for that long, and it was quite a wet ride home, especially when the wind had picked up and the waves were quite a bit bigger. But we found a nice little island, and we had brought some sandwiches and tea with us, and we sat out there in the sun a bit and just enjoyed the calmness of the scenery with hardly anyone else around. We saw a couple of other boats, but really it was pretty quiet. So that's it for this week in Stockholm. But as you know, I have been knitting a lot. So I have worked a little bit more, hardly at all though, on my socks that I was knitting last week. Not sure where I was, but I just worked on one of them a bit more. Maybe I was on the orange stripe or something. So not much at all. But I am knitting these on US 1, which is a 2.25 millimeter carbons fixed circular needles, and I'm doing the Fish Lips Kiss heel for this in a contrast color, in white. The yarn is the Regia, Arnie and Carlos design line, and this is the Fall Night color, which I wasn't sure about last week, but it is. So I still have a bit to go on that one before I do the toe, which I'll also do in white. And then this one is in the same place that I showed you last week. The heel's done, and it's just on stitch holders waiting to get work done again. I did cast on for a new project this week, which is a new pattern, and this, I'm still just knitting this one for the first time. I haven't written up the pattern yet, but this will most likely be released as I think it's time for another free pattern on Ravelry, so this will be a free sock pattern, and I don't really have like a date or a timeline for it anyway now, just because I just started working on it and I haven't done any of the pattern writing yet. But yeah, I'll show it to you. So here it is, and I am knitting this in the Mint Rain hand-dyed yarns, which I showed you last week. This is the tag, And this is the Soft Sock Base, which is 100% superwash merino. It's 490 yards and 100 grams. And this is the bubblegum colorway. So I did cake it up, and it's quite bright, but it's not as bright as my computer thinks it is. It's more like that color. And it's a really nice bright pink. I'm knitting these socks on a US size 0, which is a 2mm needle, and I'm using my Haya Haya. I think these are just the regular tips, because I think that I heard someone say that the Haya Haya Sharps had a blue cord and these ones have a clear cord. Not sure. But you can see that there's a little sort of arrowhead pattern in there, and it's a little bit hard to tell the texture on the camera. It's a little bit easier to see in person. But I've done a 1x1 rib up here on the top, and then it will be this pattern down the leg and on the foot as well. I haven't decided what I'll do for the heel yet, but I am thinking about doing a contrasting color for the heel and toes. So yeah, doesn't have a name yet, doesn't have any details really, but that will continue for a little while while I work on it. I find that I can't work on socks too long because working on the size 0 needles hurts my hands a bit. And so unfortunately that's really the size that I like to use to get the gauge that I would like to have. With the carbons it does work on the 2.25mm, which is the size 1. But for the Haya Hayas, which I really like using, I need to use the size 0s, and I just can't work on them for that long. So anyway, I cast this on right before we left for the summer house, and then I worked on this a bit on the train and on the ferry on the way to the house. So I got a little bit of work on it, but then we spent a lot of time doing other things at the summer house, so I wasn't knitting that much, but I thought that I was probably going to get a lot of knitting time on this because I thought it was going to be rainy, but then it was sunny, and so I'm okay with that. I will also mention a technique tip with this sock in the techniques tips section later on. But first I'll show you one other project that I've been working on this week, and I showed you the beginning of this last week, which is a new design, and it's knit in the Holst Garn Super Soft 100% wool in the iced colorway, and I bought this at Makery 14, which is a yarn store in Old Town here, and I've knit a lot on it. This was one of the main things I was working on this week, and you will see that here. It's quite large. Oh. And of course, that's the back side. Of course it looks like a blob right now. I'm expecting that this will block out quite large because, first of all, it's already on my 40-inch needles and it's quite bunched up, but also because it's lace and, well, I can stretch it out with my hands quite a bit, so I know it will block quite large. I'm working on the edging right now. I have just done a few rows of the edging and I ran out of yarn. So I need to go into the city and pick up another ball of that, but I'm not sure when I'm going to do that. Perhaps, hopefully on a nice day this week, I'll be able to bike in to the city and pick up another ball of that, because I was originally thinking that I might rip back a little bit to keep it to 2 balls, which would be 100 grams, because this yarn comes in 50-gram put-ups, so I've used 2 so far. I was thinking maybe I'll rip back a little bit and make this a 2 skein shawl, so 100 grams. But I decided to make it bigger because I really like big shawls, especially for the winter and the fall, and just to wrap around me when I'm at home, especially. So for this yarn, it's actually 575 meters for 100 grams, so it's much more of a light fingering towards lace weight yarn. Not lace weight, but it is definitely a light fingering. I think that 575 yards would be a similar yardage to Brooklyn Tweed's Loft yarn, which is classified as a fingering weight, but I'm pretty sure that it is 275 yards per 50 grams, so that would be 550 yards for 100 grams, so it's really quite similar to this yarn that I'm using for the shawl. I think that the Loft yarn would be a really good substitute if you don't have access to the Holst yarn, which I think might be mostly sold in Europe. But I would definitely, if I had Loft with me here, and if I had easier access to it, I would definitely knit this in Loft too. Or that would be a good yarn to use. Similar qualities to the yarn. Anyway, so that's what I've been working on a lot this week, and I'm really excited to get that one finished, and I'm also really excited to try out my blocking wires again. I showed you that I had gotten some new blocking wires, and I actually did try them out, and they worked really well. I tried them out on something that I'm not going to show you for a little bit longer, but I was really happy with how it came out, and I had already blocked this project once, and I had done it with just using sewing pins, which was not fun because the pattern has a picot edge, but now I blocked it with using the wires, and it was just so much easier. It turned out so nice, and everything is even, and I'm really happy with it. So I'm excited to use those wires again, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to work out some sort of blocking video that I can share with you guys, but it will be a little bit tricky because of the filming, but I'll see what I can do. Also the lighting, because I'd have to block it on the floor space I have down here, and the light from the window doesn't really come that much into the room. It does, but not on the floor. So we'll see. But I would like to at least share some tips that I can about blocking, whether that's some still pictures with me recording a video or whatever. We'll see. That will happen in a little bit, probably. So yeah, that's what I've been working on this week. Mostly the shawl design. I started the sock design and the Regia, Arnie, and Carlos socks. I do have some finished objects. Last week I showed you the new mitten pattern that I'm working on, which is called the Meristem mittens, and this is a fingering weight mitten, and I have 2 of them. So these are all finished and blocked. The thumbs look kind of floppy, but I'm really pleased with how these came out. I'll put them on for you so you can see. Last week I had finished the left-hand mitten and I had started the right-hand mitten. So this week I just finished this one up and blocked them before we went to the summer house, and they were dry when I came back. So here they are. It is a sort of a ribbed lace pattern on the front pattern panel, and decreases on the top to sort of a rounded tip, which is how I prefer mittens to be. And there is a specific right and left hand so that your thumbs it fits your thumb really nicely rather than kind of pulling across the palm of the mitten. So yeah, these are currently being tested, and when my test knitters are done and after I have, done some final adjustments to the pattern, then this pattern will be ready to be released. So that's exciting. And these took less than 1 skein of fingering weight yarn. Here's how much I have left with the mittens, and of course my yardage requirements will be in the pattern. But again, if you are ever interested in exactly how much yarn I used for any particular project, my specific yardage is written on my project page for the pattern. So I make a pattern page, which is the one you see and where you would buy the pattern from, but then I also have my project page in my Ravelry projects, and on that page I have exactly how much yarn that I used. So if you ever want to check if you're going to be close, if you want to be able to compare what I actually use to what I suggest in the pattern, then you can check there. I always like to add a bit of a buffer to the yardage requirements in the pattern because you don't want people to be running out of yarn all the time with your patterns, because that's really frustrating. So, meristem mittens are finished, and I've seen some progress from one of my test knitters, and she's picked a really beautiful pale pink yarn, and they look really lovely. So, excited to see the testers' mittens when they're finished. So, okay, that is my finished object from this week. I do have one finished object from a little while ago that I hadn't shown you yet because this is a design pattern that I was working on. This pattern does not have a name yet, but it is finished and I can show it to you. And it's a cowl. So here it is. Let me hold it still for a second. That's how long it is. And there are basically 2 different lace motifs that alternate in the pattern and create this really nice drapey cowl that can be worn either for warmth or as just a kind of style accessory, which will be warm also, but you could wear it like with a coat or just with a shirt, I guess, is what I'm saying more. And I made mine so that it would be a single loop cowl, because I have the feeling that I will be wearing this. Well, I would like to wear this when I'm at school in the fall and perhaps when it's cold in a classroom or if I'm taking a test. Sometimes I like to have something that can add just a little bit of warmth without making my arms extra bulky, especially if I'm writing a test. So sometimes a shawl or cowl can be a perfect layer or just addition for that. So here it is, and I knit this in the Quince & Company Turn yarn, which is a silk and wool yarn in the terracotta colorway, and I used a little bit more than 2.5 balls for that. So this goes down about to my belly button here, and you can also wear it doubled. So with the size I knit it at, you can wear it doubled. If you wanted to, wear it underneath your coat, and if it's cold, you could have it like that or something. but I think, like I said, I'll probably mostly wear it longer. And if I knit it at this specific length because I thought that I would wear it mostly longer without doubling it so much. And if I wanted to wear it more doubled, I probably would have done a few more repeats just so that it would be a little bit less tight around my neck. But it still works around the neck doubled as is. So you can pretty much knit this as long as you want. You could knit it as a shorter cowl or even longer or this length too. So this pattern has not been test knit yet, and I guess I would like to ask you if anybody is interested in test knitting it. I will be taking 3 test knitters for this pattern, and if you would send me a private message on Ravelry, or also look over in the Ravelry group in the test knit thread, then that would be great. So just let me know if you're interested in test knitting this. Like I said, it takes a little bit over 100 grams of fingering weight yarn, so it's kind of nice when with the Quince & Company it comes in 50-gram balls, so you could use 2 and then only buy 1 more instead of having 2 100-gram skeins of fingering weight. But if you wanted to knit it, you could knit it as long as you want. So you could use up more yarn. Okay, so now for some technique tips. I have 2 different technique tips today that I want to share with you. The first technique tip I would like to share with you this week is for knitting socks and how to make a nice stretchy cuff. If you are like me and have larger calves, sometimes it is difficult to get socks to fit, because if you want to have any length in your sock, you have to have a wider cuff so that it can go up on your calf a little bit without suffocating your calf and then mostly just falling down. So what I like to do is I usually knit my socks with 56 stitches on a US 0. But for this pattern, and for some other socks, I cast on 64 stitches actually for the ribbing. And then on the row right before the pattern starts, I decrease down 8 stitches to 56 stitches. So you can see that the actual silhouette or line of the sock doesn't change that much, even though I went from 64 stitches to 56 stitches right here. 64, 56. The bottom of the sock is actually even slightly wider than the top of the sock, and of course that's because you have the 1x1 rib on the top. But with 64 stitches on the top, I just find that it makes an even stretchier cuff compared, like when you're comparing it to the leg of the sock, so that you can get a little bit of extra room if your calf is a little bit wider, like mine, and then you can still have a nice snug leg of the sock, and you won't have so much slipping, and it just makes for a better fitting sock. So that is a little tip for knitting cuffs. And then my other tip this week is with my meristem pattern for the mittens. This has to do with directional yarn overs. So a lot of times you knit yarn overs and you pull the yarn between your needles and then you yarn back over the needle. So you're moving from front backwards for the yarn over. Depending on what stitches that you have following the yarn over, it will affect how the yarn over actually looks. The other option is to do a backwards yarn over, which is to take the yarn from behind your needles and yarn over towards the front. And that creates a different look for your stitches. So, depending on what stitches you have following your yarn overs and some other things, then you might consider using a different kind of yarn over. I'll see if you can tell here, but in the beginning of this pattern on this side, I was just using a normal yarn over, and it looks different from the yarn over that's on this side. But then the top of the mitten, I did a backwards yarn over for this side, and the other regular yarn over on this side, and the pattern is then mirrored more on both sides. That wasn't on purpose, of course, but I realized partway after knitting it that I wanted to do a different yarn over, but I thought that it might be interesting to show you. And here they're all done the correct way, so in the right direction that I want. This is something that I have marked on the pattern, so you'll know exactly which ones are regular yarn overs and which ones are backwards yarn overs. If you're interested more in seeing how yarn over direction can affect the knitting, then I would recommend that you check out Isolde's technique tutorial on yarn overs, which I will have a link for in the show notes. Okay, and then finally this week I wanted to do a little question and answer sort of discussion because I really did enjoy the responses that I got last week regarding sharing designs. The past week I was listening to a recent episode from A Playful Day. Kate is her name, and she hosts the Playful Day podcast, which is an audio podcast. And I oftentimes save up several of her podcasts and then download them on my phone and listen to them while I'm traveling on the train. So I also should carry a little notebook or write it in my phone when I am listening to one of them and need to take some notes about it, because now I don't remember which episode it was, but it was one within the last 4 episodes where she was talking about kind of how knitting progresses, or this is what I took from it, I guess. A lot of times knitting books and patterns are written for beginner designs. They're classified as beginner designs. And they're simple patterns, or they have simple or not very many techniques, I guess, required to knit them. This happens with a lot of knitting books, I find. There's sort of there's a couple different categories of knitting books, but 2 sort of main categories I find are knitting books with patterns in them that could assume you were starting from 0, so they might also include a big section at the beginning with how to cast on, how to make a knit stitch, how to make a purl stitch, really basic things like that. And then there's other books which assume that you already know how to knit and present the patterns to you directly. Of course, with instructions of how to do any special stitches, or they still tell you what all the symbols mean and abbreviations and things like that. But they expect that you have a little bit of knitting knowledge. So Kate was talking about how, I don't want to quote her, I guess, because I listened to it a little while ago, but part of her discussion with someone else that she had on her podcast was about how sometimes it could be good to challenge yourself and knit a pattern that isn't for a beginner knitter, because for some people I think it's easy to get stuck in that sort of beginner stage where you want a pattern that's going to be quick and easy, and you're going to get something that looks like the picture in the end. And I think that it's really important to try out new techniques, and that's why one of the reasons why I try to introduce some techniques which may or may not be new for you, but just to share with you what I'm learning and how I'm incorporating things I learn into projects that I'm working on. Because one thing that I think is really cool about knitting is that you can always learn something new. And it's sort of a little bit unfortunate that so many books do have this how to knit section in the beginning, I think, because really, how to knit section, I think, belongs in a reference book. You know, at the beginning of every, okay, this is maybe a dumb example, but at the beginning of every book, like, that you would read, like a fiction novel or something, it doesn't begin with how to read, right? So, that's probably not a good example, but okay, think about a cookbook. When you open a cookbook, generally they don't have a section in the beginning of, this is how you take a measurement. This is how you add ingredients into a bowl. Like, they don't have those basic tools which you should already have in order to understand the rest of the book, right? So I think it's interesting that knitting books often do have it, and to me it sort of just shows that a lot of knitting books are sort of stuck at a beginner level. Now, okay, why does it matter? Well, it doesn't really. But I think that's really one of the great things about seeing so many independent designers on Ravelry, because you can make a design at whatever level they want to, and they can indicate what level that they might think that is. Like, they might note that this is an intermediate pattern or advanced pattern or something, but they don't have to stay within the restrictions of a book that shows you how to knit at the beginning, and then, like, somehow you're supposed to be able to get to this point where you can knit this pattern at the end. I don't know if that makes any sense. But I just thought it was interesting to listen to her podcast and hear her talk about, like, this idea that we should challenge ourselves, and that one of the great things about knitting is that it's sort of a low-risk activity. You can learn new things, and you can try out new things, and really the worst that could happen is that you have to rip something out and start again, and yarn is reusable. It doesn't go bad, really. So you can test things out, and just, you know. I guess another thing that she was talking about was that it might have been the episode that she was talking with the owner of Fringe Supply Co., because I know they were talking about how, like, the importance of using good tools in knitting and enjoying the tools that you work with, because you're going to be spending a lot of time with those tools, and same with the yarn. Why would you pick a yarn that you don't want to knit with if you're going to be spending hours knitting that yarn? Like, you want something that is going to be enjoyable to work with and that you're going to like the finished product of. And so same with the tools. And if you're going to invest a lot of time in a project, really, you should take your time, and you shouldn't always feel like that you have to rush to the end of projects, which I feel that too, that I want to get something finished, and, you know, I'm excited to see the finished object, which is a lot of times why I knit things, but I think it's important at the same time just to try to enjoy it along the way. And yes, knitting takes a while. I'm always kind of just interested when people are talking about knitting and saying, like, oh, this part is taking so long, like, it's all stockinette, or it takes forever, and it's like, well, that's what you sort of sign up for when you look at a pattern that has a big section of stockinette. So, to me, I'm going to try more to enjoy those parts of projects, and not pick projects that might not interest me after a little while or something. I don't know. I don't really know what the point of that was, but I found her topic an interesting one, and sort of like the idea of fast fashion sort of sneaking its way into knitting, even though knitting itself is slow because you have to knit all the stitches, but we sort of still have this consumer attitude, and which isn't always a bad thing, but it's like this desire to knit more things and see more projects and finish more things, but I guess just at the same time we need to remember to enjoy what we're working on. So that's it. Anyway, I don't really know if there was a question in there, but maybe if you want to share your thoughts with me on the board for episode 24, I would like to hear anything you have to say. So until next week, I hope you have a lot of time for knitting and are enjoying all your stitches, and hopefully have some sun as well. See you next week. Bye.